10 of Malach Yahweh, the angel of Jehovah, or the angel of the Lord. Today we're going to look at the interaction between Malach Yahweh and Elijah. I'm sure most of you know the story of Elijah on the mountaintop challenging some um, priests of Baal. We'll get into that in a bit. That's our intention today. This is found in 1st and 2nd Kings. We're going to look primarily at 1st Kings and deals with Elijah just after his duel with those priests of Baal. But we'll look a little bit before that, a little bit after that, and get an idea. Most of this is not going to relate significantly to Malach Yahweh, although Elijah does recognize him. But it's kind of an interesting thing. Just want to trigger your memories, or perhaps even bring up some things you had not seen or thought about prior to this time. I'm going to start in 1 Kings 19. I'm going to look at starting at verse 1. And in this first passage, just the first two verses. Now Ahab told Jezebel, that's his wife, of course, who was a queen, obviously, and she was the daughter of a Gentile king. I forget where it was, up north, above Israel, Tyre, Sidon, that somewhere up in there. So she was of royal family ties prior to marrying Ahab, and of course was a strong, powerful woman, an evil woman, but strong and powerful nonetheless. She had total control over her husband, which you may have seen in various episodes. So here we go. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and that goes up to making fools of the the priests of Baal, and actually notice, and had how he had killed all the prophets, and these prophets of Baal and Ashtaroth, with the sword. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He made sure it was done, but I don't know that he personally did the killing. I think this is a point at which Ahab is so shook up, he's telling Mama what's been going on. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life," that's Elijah's life, "like that of one of them," the priests of Baal he had killed at least. So in what follows in 1 Kings, we find Elijah running. He's running from Jezebel after the tremendous conflict in which Elijah's God had humiliated the priests of Baal, and Elijah had those men executed. By the way, that was like 450 prophets or priests of Baal and 400 priests of Asherah. So he had 850 men killed, executed, whatever term you wish to use. So we're going to find him running here. Let's move to verses 3 and 4. Elijah was afraid. There you go. He's just been facing 850 men who were trying to make him look like a loser. He's faced them down, had them killed. Now he's scared to death of one woman and her threat. And he ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, by the way, we're going to ask questions like, where is this all taking place? uh, he left his servant there. So Elijah ran all the way to Beersheba. That's in southern Judah, which would have been what? When I give it away later, it's about 90 miles that he ran. And he left his servant there and went on himself another day's journey into the desert. How long was that day's journey? I don't have any idea. But he came to a broom tree for shade, I assume, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. This reminds me a bit of Jonah when he had finished his tour of duty in Nineveh. I've had enough, Lord, he said, and that's Elijah said, hey, Lord, I've had enough. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. So he's in a state of exhaustion, more than likely, and he's likely in a state of depression. He stopped running, sat down under a shade tree. In his current state, he prayed to die, sounding as if he felt he was a failure somehow. An angel, verse 5, came to his aid. We'll see that in just a minute. The exhausted and depressed prophet refreshed himself and laid back down to sleep eventually. We'll see that episode as well. So 1 Kings 19, verses 5 and 6. Then he, Elijah, lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. Bossy, huh? He, Elijah, looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. This is in the middle of the wilderness. He ate and drank and then lay back down again. So in the next verse, we're going to see who that angel actually is. Well, I might as well blow it now. It's Malach Yahweh, who at least is an angel who awakens Elijah and nourishes him again. So much so that Elijah then went on a 40-day trek to meet with God. So he turns out he ran some before this 90-mile trip south. Now he's going to go 40 days into the wilderness to meet with God. Verse 7 of chapter 19. 1 Kings, of course. Then the Malach Yahweh came back a second time. So that tells me that Malach Yahweh was an angel spoken of the first time, and touched him, Elijah, and said, get up and eat. Same order he gave him before, for the journey is too much for you. So the journey, is it the journey he just came on, the 90 miles south, or is it the upcoming journey? Verse 8, so he got up and ate and drank, strengthened by that food that Malach Yahweh gave him, of course. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, also called sometimes the mountain of the Lord. Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai, where an earlier trip for a man, we all know, also involved Malach Yahweh. Exodus 3, starting in verse 1. See that man and Malach Yahweh's involvement with him. We've been through this one already. You'll know it. Exodus 3, verse 1. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. the exact description just given in 1 Kings for Elijah. And Malach Yahweh appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So this is very reminiscent of Moses' experience at Horeb, Sinai. We know it was Sinai. This wasn't the only trip to Sinai that Moses made while he was watching his father-in-law's sheep. But he went back there for the Ten Commandments. This is where the covenant was made between God and Israel. And this was also where the golden calf matter came into being. But even before that, Moses had something to do with Horeb. And let's look at Exodus chapter 17, verse 4 and 5. And when I say before that, I mean before the Ten Commandments and such, which is recalls in Exodus 20. Then the Lord said to Moses, and we're reading Exodus 17, 4 and 5. The Lord said to Moses, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Take into your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water will come out of it. So it was a site at which Moses was to strike the rock and the Lord provide water. And of course, this water was representative of Jesus. And why are you going to provide the water? So the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he named the place Massah and Meribah, because the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So they were complaining, and they were complaining about water, even though they hadn't been very long away from water, but they were griping, mumbling, grumbling. So God told Moses to go there, strike the rock, get the water. But when Elijah arrived at the mountains, and by the way, Elijah's trip was 40 days and 40 nights. You know anybody else that went into a wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights? Think about it. As a matter of fact, how long was Moses on the mountains with God? Wasn't it 40 days and 40 nights? Well, let's look at 1 Kings 19:9. Elijah has just arrived at his destination, or at least what he perceived to be his destination, at Horeb. Then he, Elijah, came there to a cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, and Yahweh said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Interesting, he was sent there, right? But that question doesn't mean why are you here. It means what are you doing while you're here, Elijah? He wants Elijah to fess up to something, and we'll get to it in a bit. This is one of those cases where the words of God don't mean what you might naturally imply. What are you doing here, Elijah? Meaning God didn't know why Elijah was there. He didn't know what he was doing. Didn't God know why Elijah was in the cave and what he was doing while he was in the cave? Of course he knew. So there's got to be some other explanation. And that is that since he knew, he wanted Elijah to think about it. And he wanted to start a conversation so that Elijah would realize something Very important because God ain't through with Elijah yet. So, clearly, Horeb Sinai is a wilderness-like area. Tells us why Elijah chose the cave as his bedroom. By the way, remember in Moses, he wanted to see God's glory. So where did God put him? In a cleft of the rock. Think that could have been Elijah's cave? No, I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Don't get too hepped up about it because we don't know the answer. The mountain's one of three in the region, by the way. There are two other mountains, and they run anywhere from something over 6,000 feet up to something around 9,000 feet. Horeb's not the tallest, it's in the middle. Horeb's like 7,500 feet above sea level at its peak. It was the home of the Midianites, remember? That's why Moses was there. He had fled to the Midianite territory and married a Midianite priest, Jethro, his daughter, and was tending Jethro's sheep. So Moses spent 40 years in this part of the country. And you remember where the Midianites came from? Abraham's son Midian, born by Keturah after Sarah's death. So these were cousins of the Jews, and that's where we are now. Elijah's back there. It's below the Dead Sea. It's in the northwest tip of Arabia between, as I recall, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. It's south and east of the Dead Sea, as I said a moment ago, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. So that's where Elijah is right now. Let me give you a bit of a quiz, just to kind of wrap things up here. It'll take a bit, but let's go through it. See if we can tie a bunch of things together. I know. I can't hear your answers, and that's fair enough, but I'll give you mine, okay? That's the whole purpose anyhow, isn't it? First question. Where did the confrontation between Elijah and the priests of Baal, B-A-A-L, take place? And by the way, when you're pronouncing words in many languages, when you have back-to-back vowels, you're supposed to pronounce each one of them. That's why you'll normally not hear me call him Baal, but Baal. A-A. A-A. Do that with it what you wish. 1 Kings 18:17 answers that. It says, came about when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said to him, is this you, you troubler of Israel? And Elijah said, I haven't troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have forsaken the commandment of the Lord, and you have followed the Baals. Now then, send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel. Remember, Ahab was the king of Israel as the northern kingdom after the split. The southern kingdom was made up of what? Judah and Benjamin. But all the other 10 tribes were north, and they were part of Israel, which was part of Ahab's kingdom. Now then, send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, showdown time, together with 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of the Asherah, that would be those who worship around poles, who eat at Jezebel's table. He says, your wife is the one feeding all of this. And she actually would have been the one why Ahab had gone that direction also. So, where was it the event to take place? Mount Carmel, just inland from the sea up in the high area. So where did Ahab go after the event? after Elijah had humiliated this 850 guys, had them executed, where did Ahab go? And if you remember, just before it started to rain, Elijah told Ahab, you better get your chariot out of here because that chariot is going to get stuck in the mud if you don't. This was before it rained. 1 Kings 18:46, the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and outran Ahab, that would be Ahab's chariot, to Jezreel. This is a plain. As I remember, Jezreel means to sow or to scatter, S-E-W, as in sow seed, or to scatter seed. And that's got a number of different events happen on the plain of Jezreel, and in the end times will happen there again. So Ahab ran to Jezreel. Well, where was Jezebel when she learned of the confrontation? Well, she heard it from Ahab, so she was in Jezreel too. Ahab said Elijah had killed the 450 priests of Baal and the 400 of the Asherah. But of course, we don't know that, but we do know that he is responsible for their being gathered up and then executed. 1 Kings 18:40. Then Elijah said to them, whoever it was around him following his orders, seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook of Kishon. He didn't herd them down like a bunch of sheep, so he just simply was responsible for their going there and slew them there. But their killings, their murders, their executions, however you want to term it, Ahab attributed to Elijah. So do you think Elijah personally killed all 850? I don't think that's very likely. But I don't know that it's impossible, but not likely. Where was Elijah when Jezebel made her threat? Where had Elijah run to? He had run with Ahab. He was in Jezreel too. Now, why did Elijah run? Did he really believe Jezebel had the power to carry out her threats? You better believe it. She was the queen. She had utter control over her husband. 1 Kings 21:25, for example, says, surely there was no one like Ahab who sold himself to do evil in the sight of Yahweh, because Jezebel, his wife, incited him. He was doing Jezebel's bidding. So could Jezebel have pulled this off? Yes. Kind of an interesting thought, though. If she were going to want to execute Elijah, why would she tell him? I think she wanted him to run because he wouldn't be around to mop up after everything that had happened on Carmel. And she knew that if she could get him out of there, then that thing would die down somewhat, and Baal would not be dead in Israel. My own supposition, perhaps. It's not due to me. I've found it at other places and decided that makes sense, but I'm not smart enough to figure it out myself. After Elijah's, by the way, his jog from Carmel to Jezreel, that was a 17-mile jog. And what does he immediately turn around and do? Take off 90 miles to the south to Beersheba, dump his servant, and go on into the wilderness. And after a short period of time in the wilderness, where he's confronted by Malach Yahweh, who says, get your buns up. I want you to eat because you got a long trip to Horeb. So then he begins a 40-day run, walk, whatever, to Horeb. I doubt that he ran to Horeb, but you never know. So he was sent to Horeb because he had something to learn. Elijah's pride was showing in the midst of all of this. That's something that you won't hear very often. You hear of the great thing that Elijah pulled off with these prophets of Baal. But when you get further down, in this particular case, just even to verse 10, you find out that Elijah was having a pity party. At least it seems that way. 1 Kings 19:10. And Elijah said, I have been very zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, Yahweh, torn down your altars, Yahweh, and killed your prophets with the sword, Yahweh. And I'm adding the Yahwehs, of course. And I alone am left. I'm the only one who survived, Lord. And they are after me. They seek to take my life, to take it away. That's what I'm saying. That is one humongous, one-man pity party. You can read the rest of the story as you finish 1 Kings 19:10, noting that God didn't buy the pity party stuff at all. And that's why he told Elijah, get your buns up, go on 40 days journey to Horeb, and I'll meet you there. Well, he did. And he ended up sleeping in a cave. And when you go there, there's a story that people say, God speaks to you in a still small voice. Well, if you go, that came out of God's speaking to Elijah in the cave. But if you look closely, God didn't speak to him in a whisper. It doesn't tell you what was in the whisper. Elijah had to go outside the cave, then God spoke to him. Did he speak quietly? We do not know. It wasn't said. So next time you hear somebody say, God will speak to you in a still small voice, well, no, just forget it. Move on. Okay, so what's next? Well, next is Hezekiah, Isaiah, and Malach Yahweh. What does Malach Yahweh have to do with Hezekiah? A whole bunch. This is where you may get a new view of Jesus